Hello and welcome to the Watering Hole. Thanks for checking out this clip. Don't forget to like and subscribe because that'll make the baby Jesus cry, and I know how much you guys love making the baby Jesus cry. Researchers have found that books about difficult adult subjects make kids better readers. This was sent to me by Anonymous. If you have news items, send them to news@vicerhino.com. You have to compete with this anonymous person because he sends a lot, and I think all three of the news items tonight are from him. So you got some stiff competition if you want to actually make it on the show, but that's where you can send stuff. Most of the news items I'm covering are old because all the new stuff is the depressing Supreme Court stuff. So this is from back in March. A non-profit group has identified more than 1,500 books. Yeah, that's the PEN America, 1,500 books banned in states across America. Someone from Moms for Liberty? Yeah, Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, says public school children K through 12 do not have unfettered access to the internet at school, or movies, or music. But somehow these books with these horribly explicit graphic content are finding their way onto bookshelves in public schools all over America.
Are they talking about just there was a cartoon naked person? Because that was in my biology textbooks in 6th grade. Is that... Should I have cared about that, or like,
I don't know.
Is that something that I should have been concerned about?
I don't know. Doesn't make sense to
me.
But, like, we're not saying unfettered access to books. We're saying don't ban, here's the thing. With books, it's kind of self-selecting. Like, with movies or video games or whatever, or music... Like, it doesn't take any extra skill to press play on an explicit song versus a kid's nursery rhyme. It's the same skill set. So, like, having limitations on that makes sense. But for libraries, it's kind of self-selecting. So, like, you fill up a library that's, like, if the school is all the way from K to 12, which that's most schools aren't, they'd go from, like, K to 8 and then 9 to 12... but like, say it's like K to 12, all of them. Put all the books in. Have every kindergartner have access to Kurt Vonnegut, and I can't think of any other banned authors right now, but there are lots of them. Fahrenheit 451. Is it 451? I might have the number wrong on that.
Catcher in the Rye.
Well, that's not a good book, but yeah, no, all these books that get banned, have them fully accessible to kindergartners. You know what the kindergartners are going to take out from the library? The big old board picture books. No. And I don't...
Yeah.
Like board as in, like, they're made of cardboard, not board as in...
Yeah,
boring.
The ones that have, like, 10 pages, because 10 pages makes a book that thick.
Yeah, Rosina's pointing out that some kids' nursery rhymes are disturbing as hell. Yeah, like Ring Around the Rosie, the Black Death one.
Yep. I remember when I was in, and granted, this is PCA, so all of our stuff was built specifically for kids in the ABECA, programs. But I remember most of the books that I pulled out of the library for the longest time before getting to like Boxcar Kids and stuff like that was those books that showed you the insides of how things worked. Where they would just like here's a Lincoln limousine. Let's cut it in half so you can see the insides of what it is. Like that's the stuff that was my jam when I was a kid.
Yeah. So like, but that's what I mean. It's like TV, movie, music or whatever. You press play and it works. But like no kindergartner is going to go into the library and start taking out these advanced controversial books. So like
no, they're not.
There's a reason for controls on the internet and movies and music, but books kind of do that on their own. Also, like one of the best ways to get kids interested in reading a book is to tell them that it's banned, because like I don't know how it came to be in my house, but I saw in my living room, sitting on top of my living room PC, a copy of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which I know is one of those books that gets banned frequently. And it must have been my partner who brought it in, because like none of my kids really knew about it, but like I told my middle child, like held it up. He's like, hey, you could probably read this book. And you know what? it's illegal for you to read it in some places in the States. And his eyes just lit up.
Yeah.
And like, yeah. So now they're very interested in reading that book. Whereas if it was just another book, it's like, it's just another book. They tried to read Slaughterhouse-5, but it was a bit convoluted for them.
I've never read Slaughterhouse-5.
It's very good, but it's very confusing until you figure out what's going on. Because like it just jumps back and forth in the timeline of this guy's life, and it doesn't tell you that's what it's doing.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's very good though. I highly recommend it. So yeah, Gay Ivey, professor of literacy at University of North Carolina, said that school boards and policymakers do not agree about the purpose of reading in school. Whereas these researchers found that reading books considered disturbing by students was beneficial for their learning and emotional development. The two said parents also noticed growth in their children after reading the disturbing books. So that's the thing, is that if a kid is reading a book that has content that makes them uncomfortable,
it makes them think.
It makes them think. It makes them... Fennec is saying, what constitutes disturbing? It depends who you ask. In this context, they're talking about books dealing with things like drugs, suicide, sex, abuse. So, like, actual disturbing content, not the faux disturbing, oh, there's two boys that kissed. Because that's not actually disturbing.
It's only disturbing if you've already been bred to be a homophobe.
Yeah. But yeah, like reading about situations like that, it's kind of like, I remember when COVID first hit and all the lockdowns were in full swing, it started being talked about that watching horror movies is actually healthy, like it's good for your mental health because it engages your brain into that fight-flight response in a safe environment. So it's it almost like causes like a similar reaction to like if you were to like go on a roller coaster or something. So it like, I don't know, I forget exactly what it was, but that's what actually got me to watch Alien for the first time, because I'd never seen it because I fucking hate horror movies, and everybody had told me that Alien's a horror movie, and I didn't really realize that by horror they meant like 80s creature feature.
Which is closer to a thriller than anything.
Yeah, and I fucking loved it. I'm like, oh, it's too bad that I waited so long for this. Bring back American Psycho as required reading? Sure. But yeah, no, I hadn't watched Alien for a long time. And then when I heard that, like, oh, it's good for your mental health to watch horror, I'm like, okay, well, Alien is like sci-fi horror, so maybe I will be okay with that one. And then it turned out to not even be... I mean, like, there was a little bit of body horror going on with the face huggers.
The chest burst scene and stuff like that.
Yeah, but the chest burst scene is so iconic that I've already seen that out of context like 50 million times, not to mention in Spaceballs. But, yeah, so it's kind of the same thing with books, is like, it's putting you in these difficult, controversial, uncomfortable situations, but in a safe place. So, like, if you're curled up in bed, you're not actually experiencing these things, but you are now being taught to empathize with someone who's experienced these things through the book. So it's good for emotional development. Yeah. And many of the students chose to read books so they gave these kids books during class time. They were not told which books to read. They were just given like the full selection. So
you mean that they're just allowed to do the selection process you were talking about before anyway?
Yeah. Well, they're specifically looking at grade 8. And they didn't pressure the kids to finish the books. There was no schoolwork related to the books. It was just, here's some books. We want you to read them. And
that's reasonable.
Yeah. And so many of the students chose voluntarily to read books that deal with difficult subjects like depression, suicide, illegal drug use, or sexual exploitation. So like they didn't make them read those books. Those were just available options when they said, here's a bunch of books they want you to read. Some of the books the students chose were ones that schools around the country have banned. These books include 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher, Identical by Ellen Hopkins, and Sold by Patricia.
I heard you say an author's name, and I thought it was just a very strangely pronounced name for a second there because it cut off at a weird area. And then I saw your lips are still moving. I'm like, oh, no, he's just broken.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
So instead of being harmed by such subjects, reading about fictional characters made them more empathetic, she said. Ivy also said they were more thoughtful about the characters' motivations and actions. The researchers found that reading made the students happier and helped some heal from sadness or depression. The difficult nature of the books made the students more likely to discuss the subjects with teachers, parents, and friends. So not only does the experience of reading these books help them process things for themselves, but it also makes them more likely to have discussions about these sorts of topics with trusted friends and adults in their life. Which
because there's only so far a kid can care about the quick brown fox jumping before they're like, no, here, because like so when I was a kid, I grew up, I read Stuart Little, and there's a little bit in that book that you can talk about over the main story, like how there's one of the characters in the book is the type of person to say, oh, I'll get to that, and never actually get to that, and they're like berated for it throughout the book. That's the most I was able to talk about. But then like when you look at some of the media that can be considered very violent that I was consuming around the time, stuff like Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball Z, there was a lot more discussion to be had about characters and motivations and the whys. And even when they did things like, oh, here's this person who was a villain and responsible for almost obliterating all of these people. They're a good guy now because they've gone on this character arc. That's a fairly complex thing for a kid to have to grapple with, of like, I was rooting against this person 100 episodes ago. It turns out that complex shit, kids eat it the fuck up.
Kids love it. The social, with regards to the books, the social interaction around them is what really important, including talking to parents and teachers. Ivy said that she and Johnston came to realize that what really matters is the meaning that the kids make out of the books, not the adults' meaning that they make, which are oftentimes really off base.
Yeah. It's because we have a lot of predispositions that we walk in with, whereas kids get to walk in with more of a clean slate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Students are able to read characters facing difficult decisions and think about how they would react to a situation described in the book. So like that's what you were saying earlier, where they now get to think about these situations and how they would act in that situation. And it's kind of like mental practice for if something like that should ever happen.
Yep. Now you get to think like, hey, what happens if you're in a situation where somebody who bullied you or did these terrible things or said these terrible things is now turning another leaf? How do you act towards that person now? Do you accept them? Why or why don't you? Well, these characters in this far more complex piece of media dealt with that, and you consumed that, so there you go.
Yeah. So that's basically everything in this. I just want to finish up by saying I'm Dan Novak. It's like they finish their written article the same way like a reporter on the street would finish.
Yeah, this has been Dan Novak signing out.
Yeah, it just kind of made me giggle when I got there. Okay.
Well, there we go. I'm just trying to fill in the void right now between this and the next topic.
Italian Shakespeare says, I remember reading about the Holocaust and found it very upsetting, but I learned just how evil the Nazis were, and I think it needs to be talked about even if I don't want to. So yeah, I vividly remember in high school, grade 9 or 10, reading The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, which is the story of how she survived the Holocaust. Her whole family died in concentration camps. Actually, I don't think she ever found out what happened to her father, but like they got arrested by the Nazis and then she never saw him again. So there's not really much question as to what happened there.
Yeah.
but and this was in the Christian high school that I went to. And because Corey Ten Boom, very devout Christian, and there was a very Christian spin on it with how like she finishes the book with the story of how she met one of the concentration camp guards at a church service after the fact, and through the power of Christ, she was able to forgive him, and they had a touching reunion or whatever. Like, I don't know, like, like I'd have to read it again as an atheist to see what my thoughts are on it there, but like, it's a very powerful book, and like even, Neuromdipus says, some things should not be forgiven. I'd agree with that one, but however, it's also like, it's not for me to say that the Holocaust victim shouldn't forgive the Nazi. I am not going to blame any Holocaust survivor if they decide not to forgive the Nazis ever. I would agree with that decision. But in the situations where somebody says, yes, I forgave those people, if that is part of your healing journey, then I'm not going to try and take that away from you.
Always leave it to the victim.
Yeah. Now, the idea that forgiving of your abusers has to be part of the healing journey, that's a super toxic message that I don't agree with at all. And in the book, there probably is a good deal of that in there, just based on the fact that she is very devout Christian. But still, it's a very graphic book that I was exposed to at a fairly young age. And it affected me very deeply. But like in a good way. And
I'm trying to think of like outside of, because I wasn't a huge reader back then. I mean, I was trying to think of what I would say was like the most complicated thing pre-middle school. Probably the Harry Potter series, and at that point it hadn't gotten far enough to where like anything complicated had been introduced that merited conversation at all. Like, I think the most complicated thing in that whole series is the Severus Snape heel turn, both of them, and
spoilers.
Yeah, it's fine. But I can't think of anything past that would have like been that overly complicated for me to have to figure out. That's a very every character is cut and dry the book series until you get to that. And even after that, it's still very cut and dry.